This is the Truth Network.
Now we're doing 110, there certainly was a race. For a Rambler to pass a caddy would be a big disgrace. The guy must have wanted to pass me out as he kept on tooting his horn. I'll show him that a Cadillac is not a car to scorn. Beep, 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 his horn went beep, beep, beep. Now we're doing 120 as fast as I could go. The Rambler pulled alongside of me as if we're going slow. The fella rolled down his window and yelled for me to hear, "Hey buddy, how can I get this car out of second gear?"
Welcome to the Christian Car Guy Radio Show.
I say this calls for action, and now.
Look us over, then give a cheer. American Motors have the cars this year. You'll like their style and like their design. We know whatever your kind of car, you'll see it in our line. You'll see that Rebel's the new one, Rambler's got more. Marlin's a great one, so's Ambassador. We're proud as punch of our brand new look, exciting all the way at your Rambler dealers today.
Oh, we are so excited today to honor the life of AMC, which you may know, if some of you may not know. American Motors Corporation actually came from the idea of Hudson. Did you know that? Nash Rambler? You didn't know that?
I did. I got into the cars thing later in life, and that, I was not the car enthusiast as a young man.
Well, let me tell you, we have an amazing show for you today, as there is a new book out called The Complete Life, or The Complete Book of AMC Cars, American Motors Corporation, 1954 to 1988. And so for those who can remember the car, the Gremlin, or maybe they can remember the Pacer, or maybe, you really, some interesting cars, right?
The Hornet.
The Hornet, right? Yeah. And that came from the Hudson. And you might remember, if you watched the movie Cars, right? There was the blue Hudson Hornet in that particular one. And, of course, the little Nash Rambler song that we heard at the beginning of the show, or there's so many neat things. Now, the reason that's neat to me especially is that my father was the AMC Jeep dealer in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And then later, at the point in time that Jeep was purchased by Chrysler, at that moment in time, I happened to be a Chrysler dealer that got Jeep, okay? And so I've been very connected to these franchises my whole life, and to say that when I flipped through this book that I had memories like, oh my goodness, and we have two of the gentlemen very much responsible for this book. We have Patrick Foster and Tom Glatch with us. Welcome, guys.
Welcome. Well, thanks for having us on.
You have no idea, no earthly idea what it did for my heart to flip through these pages.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
You like it?
Oh, to say I like it would be an understatement of almost biblical proportions.
That makes my day. That very much does.
And again, for me, I worked in the parts department of my dad's dealership. And if you remember, I don't know how familiar we were in those days, all the parts catalogs for AMC were a lot different than General Motors catalogs. They went back, especially the Jeep catalogs, they would go back to the 40s.
Yes.
And so, and we had people coming in that needed a part for an old Hudson, or they needed a part for a Nash Rambler, or a little Metro, all these cars that you guys did. And, for example, one of the pages, the highlight of my whole, seeing this book, was on my 16th birthday, which that would have been in 1971. My father gave to me a Pierre Cardin Javelin.
Wow. Oh, wow. Nice dad.
And so you can see when I flipped to that page, and there sat that Pierre Cardin Javelin. And for those of you may not even know what a Javelin was. It was a sports car for American Motors. And Pierre Cardin was a very famous designer at that point in time. And what they did was, I had a silver one with a purple stripe.
Yes. Yeah.
And it had this interior that was just off the hook. It had these two stripes that went across the seat and down and whatever. But if you get this book, you can look at it.
Went right up onto the headliner, too.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
It was nuts. Yeah.
I don't think any car ever did that, other
don't
than
think so,
the Zero Cardon. No.
Well,
know, I
interestingly,
know
I
exactly
happen
what
to know
you're-
the other one that did it. It was the Buick GSX, the original.
You're right. You're right.
Oh, okay. I didn't know
Yeah,
that.
you're right. Those are the only two.
that I know of.
But
But
I know what you're talking about with the dealership, because back then I worked at an American Motors dealer in Derby, Connecticut, and I was a car salesman. And Derby, Connecticut is the smallest town in Connecticut, but we were the second largest dealer in the state, and the largest dealer also happened to be the largest American Motors dealer in the world. So we sold a lot of cars, and Javelins, yeah, I loved them.
yeah, and so, for me, again, and just to give you, for those of you who are listening, let me tell you a little history, because you're going to find this fascinating. Everybody driving around today know what a Jeep Grand Cherokee is, right? What you don't know is it's so far from a Jeep, it's not even funny. It is completely, you are climbing into a Rambler, Hornet, Sportabout station wagon. I can prove that, by the way. I don't know if you guys have ever thought about this. But what happened was, one of the great cars American Motors made, in fact, my sister had a Rambler American, I think it was a 66 model.
I have a 67 myself right now. That's my company car.
It might have been a 67 because that was the new body style. It was really cool. Anyway, she had that car for nearly 25 years, and she put over 700,000 miles on that car.
Oh, wow.
It had a straight six, and it was like a 232. That same engine that was actually bought from International Harvester, that was the 232 inline six-cylinder that was in that Rambler American, was the same engine. If you bought like a Jeep, like when the Jeep Wrangler first came out, same engine.
The 4-liter.
Right. What became the 4-liter was that, or it might have been a 258. Whichever it was that same engine that we had been putting in Jeeps forever and ever and ever.
Right.
But by the way, it was the same engine that you would find in a Hornet, or you would find it in a Gremlin.
Oh, yeah, it's the
My
same
brother-
engine that's in my 67 Rambler.
Correct. My brother had a
You know why they
Gremlin.
kept it so long? It's a great engine.
It was completely bulletproof. Like I said, my sister put over 750,000 miles on it. So the Rambler American became the Hornet.
Yep.
Yeah.
And the Hornet, they were like, we need a station wagon. So they came out with originally a 2-wheel drive Hornet station wagon they called a Sportabout, which I thought was a really, really neat name. And it was a beautiful car. Do you remember that car, Bob?
Well, I was wondering if that was before the Eagle.
Correct. That's exactly what it became.
And the Eagle,
made it,
wasn't that 4-wheel drive
right.
availability?
When they changed, they put the 4-wheel drive in it. They became an Eagle station wagon.
The clouds are clearing in
The
my
clouds are
mind.
clearing. Okay. So now let's fast forward to, I'm going to guess it must have been in the maybe 91, 92, when Lee Iacocca goes over to France, because Renault has totally dropped the ball on Eagle. They've dropped the ball on Jeep.
Everything.
It's just unbelievable.
Yeah.
And so Iacocca, being the car man that he was, he was a car guy, Bob, I'm telling you. He was a genius, okay? So he goes over there, and of course he wants the Jeep Wrangler, and of course, he wants a Jeep Cherokee. But what they show him on their, look what we've got, these plans to make a new Eagle wagon. And it was the Eagle wagon that they had designed at Renault was what became the Grand Cherokee. But when Iacocca looked at it, he goes, nobody wants an Eagle. We're going to call that a Jeep Grand Cherokee.
I get it.
You get it?
I get it.
Yep.
And here's the absolute...
I think it worked out.
Well, yeah, because here's the deal. An Eagle station wagon, Renault Eagle station wagon in that year range, they went from $19,000, $20,000. They were not terribly expensive because, who would buy an Eagle? It was just that way. Oh, and Iacocca comes out with a car, if I'm not mistaken, it was $25,000 as a Jeep. And within,
that's testing my memory bank.
and we sold we sold those things like, I know, because I was a Jeep dealer. And we sold those things. There was no way you could keep one in stock. Now, you could keep all the Eagle station wagons you ever wanted in stock, but you couldn't keep a Grand Cherokee in stock. And within 2 years, we were selling Grand Cherokee Limiteds in the $33,000 range for a very nice, and it just goes to show you, man, that the market drives all that stuff. And
well, I'll give you a little story that I don't think most people have heard. When Chrysler took over American Motors, their marketing people said, "Well, let's take a look at who these American Motor Jeep buyers are."
Oh, I hate to cut you off because we got to go to a break, but I am dying to hear that story. We're going to go to a break. When we come back, yes, we're going to hear more about American Motors, but we're going to even go a little weirder for you, and I'm going to show you how that relates to why in the Old Testament the women were not allowed to come into the temple during their menstrual cycle. Like, what's up with that, Robby?
You're listening to the Truth Network and truthnetwork.com.
Look us over, then give a cheer. American Motors have the cars this year. You'll like their styling, like their design. We know whatever your kind of car, you'll see it in our line. You'll see that Rebel's the new one, Rambler's got more. Marlin's a great one, so's Ambassador. We're proud as punch of our brand new look, exciting all the way at your Rambler dealers.
There you go. We are honoring the life of AMC, especially with the authors and the people who put this book together, the complete book of AMC Cars, American Corporations, 1954 to 1988. And here's the biblical correlation. If you guys, I mentioned this, and you're going to say, Robby, that's weird, but I think when you see where I'm going with this, you're going to say that is absolutely beautiful, and here's how it correlates. God absolutely loves life. He loves it. He thought about you before the foundation of the earth, and he's so excited you're around, you have no idea. He loves you more than can you possibly imagine. And which, by the way, he also loves every grasshopper, and he loves every sparrow, and all of it. But God loves life. And so when you see these, and a lot of people say God's mad at women because when they have their menstrual cycle in the temple back in the days, when they had the temple, they weren't allowed to come in there during their menstrual cycle. And then afterwards, they'd have to go to the priest. Well, what's going on with that? And then they would have to come out of what they called a mikveh. The Jews called it a mikveh. We call it baptism. Here's why. It's absolutely gorgeous. And it has to do with why God honors life and why I honor AMC, Hudson, and all those things. Is there was an egg that didn't make it. And because it didn't make it, God wants to honor that life. And so there's a period of mourning. Like you see somebody wearing black at a funeral, that's completely natural because they are mourning the life that didn't happen. And God goes into mourning because everything from his standpoint, if Adam and Eve hadn't done what they were supposed to be, was supposed to be life, right? And by the way, there were things that would happen with a man and they weren't allowed to go either because he felt the same way about it, that there was a potential life that didn't happen. And so there's a mourning process. But here's the cool part. When you were baptized, if you're a Christian, I hope you are, they said, buried in the likeness of his death, raised to walk in newness of life, you see? And so the women, after their period, which was 7 days was the point where they couldn't go into the, in the temple area. After that 7 days, on the 8th day, which is the miracle day, it's the day of the cleansing of the temple, the day a boy would be circumcised. It's the 8th day. It's a big, huge deal. On the 8th day, right, they would have a mikveh. They would go into this water baptism and they'd come out. Why? Because God's so excited that now there's a new life in place and a potential for a new you or a new person coming out. Is that cool, Bob?
Very, very, very cool.
And so we want to honor a life that actually gave birth to so much of what people celebrate. If you own a Jeep today, and several of those vehicles came out of, to some extent, there was a man by the name of Willys, and there was Kaiser, right? And I don't know if you knew the connection between Kaiser and Willys, but they were part of that. And then, all these things, all these men, we stand on the shoulders of great men. and there was a man behind, Iacocca, and there were, and all those things. And so when we left our heroes, I should be highlighting them. I apologize, but I had to get that out, guys. You were telling us a story, and I don't want to miss it. I'm so sorry.
Yes. Well, when Chrysler took over American Motors Jeep, the marketing people said, well, let's see what sort of buyers that this company has. They're probably just a bunch of, low-income people. Well, they looked through, and they looked at the people who were buying the Jeep Grand Wagoneer, and they had higher incomes and higher demographics than even the most expensive Chrysler buyer.
Yeah.
They were the highest demographics in Chrysler Corporation. And they were amazed because they had thought, like so many people, well, Jeep, it's a utility vehicle. It's not something that wealthy people like. Well, they didn't realize that wealthy people were buying them by the score, by the thousands, and which is still true today. It's a Jeep Wagoneer, Grand Wagoneer, or Wagoneer Limited rather. That's a really like a halo car. People look at it and say, "Wow, that really is the top of the line," and just shows how great the brand is.
I love that term, halo car. I really, really do.
Yes.
As that there are so many great cars that were halo cars. The Corvette itself is a halo car.
Yes.
That just gives the increase to the value. Chrysler was the king from my standpoint, being a Chrysler guy and an AMC guy. The AMX, if you're familiar with that car, Bob, you're familiar with the AMX?
Oh, yeah.
Are you familiar with the 1969 AMX?
Not specifically.
That car had a compression ratio of like 12 point something to 1. It was a rocket ship. And it only seated 2 people like a Corvette.
Yeah. But it was a lot less expensive than a Corvette.
Oh, yeah. It was but man, if it came in a straight drive, and because of the compression ratio, when you took your foot off the gas, it almost threw you through the windshield.
Yeah.
Because that idea of compression braking, like, man, you did not want to downshift that car real fast and go into a turn or something because it would lock up the back wheel.
Yeah.
But anyway,
American Motors made a lot of terrific cars. You mentioned earlier the Pacer. And, how can anybody forget a Pacer once they've seen it? It was just the most unique new car design anybody ever introduced. And it was wildly successful for a short while. And then, for various reasons, which we talk about in the book, its popularity faded and the car went out of production. But
and you remember the book, Oh God, with George Burns and John Denver. That featured a Pacer, and when you really think about it from a car business history standpoint, the Chrysler came up with this whole idea. I'm trying to think what they called it, but the Concorde had it, and all these cars had wheels on each corner so they could get this wider stance.
Cab forward.
Right, cab forward design.
Yeah.
Well, the Pacer had that going on long before the designers.
Years before.
Oh, yeah.
It was genius. It was genius. You can tell we're having fun here today on a Christian Car Guy show, and this is a live show, and we would love for you to call in with your favorite AMC moment or some life that you want to honor. We would love that. You call us 866-348-7884. I know we've tickled something. You call us, 866-34-TRUTH. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Truth Network and truthnetwork.com.
Now we're doing 110, this certainly was a race. For a Rambler to pass a caddy would be a big disgrace. The guy must have wanted to pass me out as he kept on tooting his horn. I'll show him that a Cadillac is not a car to scorn. Beep, 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 his horn went beep, beep, beep. Now we're doing 120 as fast as I could go. The Rambler pulled alongside of me as if we're going slow. The fella rolled down his window and yelled for me to hear, "Hey buddy, how can I get this car out of second gear?"
Oh, if you don't remember that song, it was so funny. And for us Rambler dealers, we loved it,
Nowadays, if you go to any gathering of Rambler owners, that song is always played over the loudspeakers.
Of course, of course.
That's like our theme song.
And so we are honoring a life here, life of, maybe there's some great memories for you. And, during the break, Bob pointed out. Go ahead, Bob, point it out.
Pointed out, in high school, a young lady that went to school with me had the classic car wearing blue jeans, the Levi's Gremlin.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It was just amazing to me that when I saw that, I was like, how cool is that?
My sister had one. And, my dad was a pretty creative guy. And I had a Gremlin X myself at one point with a 304 3-speed. It was a rocket ship. But what my dad would do with those cars, again, we lived in Albuquerque, and the University of Albuquerque was there. And the University of New Mexico was there, and their mascot was a Lobo. So he made an El Lobo edition of the Gremlin, which those were all 304 V8s. He got the logo from the Lobo that UNM had on the side of their football helmets, and in the white stripe, or the stripe that was on the side of the Gremlin, man, here was this El Lobo. And back then, if you might remember, CB antennas were a big deal. And so he had a big whip CB antenna on it.
Wow.
Was that a successful marketing adventure?
Oh, my goodness. It took a regular Gremlin, as I recall, Gremlins were about $1,200 to $1,800. A Gremlin X about $21 or something like that. But, he would take it up to $3,500, $3,600 for the, El Lobo edition.
That's a nice sticker.
Oh yeah, but you could get one anywhere else in the world. But Bob Dillmore's Key American, there you go.
There you go.
I had a Gremlin X too, but mine was a 6. I didn't have the V. I wanted the V8, but had to settle for the 6.
And they had those white, that was when white letter tires first kind of came out. We went from red walls to. For the sporty look, you begin to get those.
Well, you and I must be about the same age.
Yeah, I was born in 1955.
Oh, okay. I'm a couple of years older than you.
I'm 56.
Yeah, so we're
Oh,
yeah,
you're a kid.
From the same era.
Great times, and so I have to tell you this other story. I always get a kick out of Bob. Because we were the Jeep dealer, and you can imagine how many Jeeps are in Albuquerque. It's in the mountains, for those of you who don't know, the Sandia Mountains. And so we traded for a 1943 Willys CJ2A, right? Mm-hmm. And this thing had a hard top on it. It was back then you put all this stuff on it. And it was painted this sort of powder blue. It was kind of weird looking. And so we called it the Blue Goose. And... back then, those vehicles had 6-volt systems.
Oh, yeah.
And generators. They didn't have alternators. Did you ever deal with one of those, Bob?
Right. Very, 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 very little.
Well, of course.
With the generator, when you stop at a traffic light, the lights dim.
Right.
Because the motor slows down, so the generator slows down.
Well, the other thing is that, we tried to explain to everybody that bought the Blue Goose, do not jump this car off.
Oh, gosh. 12 volts.
Oh, yeah.
So...
Just to let it roll.
Right. And it was just, you cannot leave these hubs locked. There was all sorts of things about that car that were unique to its age. But everybody that would get it would tear it up. They'd either jump it off or do whatever because they just didn't know. And so we traded for that car about every other year. Well, here come back the Blue Goose.
She's back.
She's back. It was, just like it didn't really have an owner's manual back then, but it was something that it's just a funny story. But I know you're listening and you're thinking, man, I know a story about 866-348-7884, 866-34-TRUTH. So I got to know, man, the book again is the complete book of AMC cars, and it's got all the pictures. It has the Pierre Cardin Javelin. It has the Levi Gremlin. It has, all those Hudsons and Nashes, and oh my goodness, and the Metropolitan,
and the Pacer.
Yeah, it's in there, and even up into the, they made, I think it was called a Sprint. that looked like a Hornet
Yeah.
hatchback, and it had a tent that came out.
Yeah.
All those pictures that brought back all sorts of crazy memories.
And when we put the book together, we tried to use photographs that people have never seen before as much as possible. And you know, we my partner on the book shot a lot of the photography himself, and he did just a fantastic job. So visually, it's a really beautiful book, and you read it, it's got a lot of information, it's got a lot of good stories in it.
If you are a car guy, I got to tell you, this makes them wonderful. I mean, anybody that's flipping through these pictures, you're going to bring back a lot of memories of, you know, the car company that was competing at the time against General Motors, you know, Ford and Chrysler, which had them outgunned financially, unbelievably.
Talk about David and Goliath.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
You know, you don't have to be a biblical scholar to understand this.
Yeah.
So what possessed you guys? You obviously have a love for it. What were you thinking when you started to put this together?
Well, I'm a longtime AMC guy. You know, I was an AMC salesman, and I've owned a lot of AMC cars over the years. I just love them, you know. And like I said, my current car is a 67 Rambler convertible that is just beautiful, and it's only got about 150,000
Oh, wow.
miles on it, and it looks like new. And people say it's the prettiest car in town. Of course, I live in a very small town.
And I've lived in Milwaukee my whole life. So Kenosha is 40 miles from where I live. As a kid, you would see the bodies go from the body plant in Milwaukee on semis down to Kenosha. You knew people that worked for AMC. It's really part of the southeastern Wisconsin culture. It still is. And I was walking downtown Kenosha last summer with an AMC styling shirt that I got from Pat. And people would come up and go, "Oh, I got an AMC," or "I had an AMC," or "I worked at AMC." It was just incredible how much American Motors is part of the culture or the part of the fabric of this part of the country.
And so when somebody says Kelvinator, does that?
Oh yeah, bingo.
Tell them about that.
It was because of Kelvinator that American Motors had, or Nash had, the first real air conditioning system in a car.
Yeah.
Wow.
Because of refrigeration.
And it was the best, too. It was
by
not
far.
only the first, but the best. Yeah.
By far. And not that expensive compared to what a lot of other companies eventually charged. One thing I need to mention is what Pat and I did. It looks like a car book. It's really a people book wrapped around cars, if you think about it. Pat has done all these interviews with these former AMC employees and high executives, and we tried to work their stories into the book as much as possible, because that's the real fascination. The cars are interesting. People are important, much more important than cars. So you've got a guy like George Romney, wouldn't work on Sunday. He was that deep.
Right.
His faith. Oh, absolutely. His faith was so deep. And on and on and on. And unlike a company like Studebaker or even Chrysler, who had a lot of poor management, I don't think there was much really in the history of American Motors of poor management. And even a guy like Roy Abernathy, who tried to take on the big three and failed, but he built a product line that carried the company through until the 1980s. So it's a fascinating people book as well as a fascinating car book.
Yeah,
Tom, I don't think I ever told you this story, but the first chairman of American Motors, George Mason, I never got to meet because he died when I was 5 years old. But, of course, George Romney, who was a very religious man, and his wife became friends with them because George worked for him. And Mrs. Romney, I knew the Romneys very well, and we were sitting on her couch talking one day, and she said, George Mason was a very, very Christian man. She said, I admired him because he treated everybody so well, the way you're supposed to treat people. And she said,
right.
And here he was the chairman of it was the 80th largest industrial company in America. And he would stop in the hall and talk with anybody, be they an executive or the guy who was mopping the floor. And
that is so cool. We got to go to another break, guys. I could definitely hear all of, and clearly those, we all stand on the shoulders of these, and a lot of people riding around in Jeeps, they don't realize the roots that they have. We'll be right back with a whole lot more Christian Car Guy Show.
You're listening to the Truth Network and truthnetwork.com.
Look us over, then give a cheer. American Motors have the cars this year. You'll like their styling, like their design. We know whatever your kind of car, you'll see it in our line. You'll see that Rebel's the new one, Rambler's got more. Marlin's a great one, so's Ambassador. We're proud as punch of our brand new look, exciting.
You remember that song?
I remember that song as part of a campaign. Somebody's campaign back in my early life had that song.
Oh, yeah. It was
or that tune, I should say.
It's been hijacked a number of times, but obviously American Motors did as well. Whoever came up with those words, they rhyme tremendously. But I have to reminisce again for a second and say, my very first car, my dad was a hardworking man, and he intended that his son would be hardworking. And so for me to get my first car, I had to buy it. And so I worked literally back then washing cars. When I was 14 years old, you could get your driver's license when you were 14 in New Mexico at the time. And I worked all summer long for $1 a day. Like 8 hours, you got $1. But, you had to, we didn't wash a few cars. We were covering the whole lot, at least 2 or 3 times a week because it's pretty dusty in Albuquerque. Anyway, at the end of the month, I got together $100 and I bought a 1960 Rambler American, which was actually a classic. They have the picture again in the book because it was the first year they were able to get the wheelbase and the styling together so that they could actually make this car that became the Rambler American, which was affectionately referred to by most of my family as an upside-down bathtub. I called it Andy.
And unique styling.
I called it Andy. And in my high school, I didn't get a lot of looks like, man, that's a nice car. And it had what they called 3 on the tree, right?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. It was a lot of fun.
With a non-synchro first gear.
Yeah, right. Double clutching back in the day.
Yeah.
If you don't.
I had a Rambler American. My first car was a 61 Rambler American. I asked my father to buy me a car, and my father said, well, I've got 7 kids. I can't buy each of you a car. You're going to have to buy one on your own. I said, oh, okay. He says, how much money you got? I'll help you find one. I said, well, I got like $25. And he said, well, that's going to limit the field a little bit.
Brings the bar down quite a bit. Huh?
Came up with a 67 Rambler American with about 100,000 miles on it. Bare basic, had rubber floor mats. The radio didn't even have push buttons. This was the basic radio. Push buttons were extra.
I remember.
And it was
that
rusty,
was my Rambler.
He helped me fix the rust, But it was a great car, though. I enjoyed it. I loved it. But nobody ever says, hey, who's that kid in the hot Rambler pulling into the drive-in?
Right.
That just doesn't happen.
Yeah, there were, and I marvel at how, all this affected so many people's lives in so many different ways. Those plants that when American Motors sold to Renault, they couldn't, for years, the U.S. government bought their vehicles from American Motors, AMC, all those Jeeps and all that stuff. And so
that's right.
They came up with American General so that they could continue to build the vehicles in those plants. And so the Hummer and all those things that you see around to this day came out of those American General plants, which were originally, right? And so Iraqi freedom, all that stuff, people are still riding around in Ramblers, whether they realize it or not.
That's right.
Yeah. And the guy who designed the first Wrangler, when they went from the CJ series to the Wrangler, he's the same guy who designed the Hummer and the Humvee.
Right.
Chuck Mashigan. And I interviewed him a long, long time ago when he was living in a nursing home by then. He had gotten very old, but he told me the story, and he showed me some of the prototypes that they built before they settled on a final design. He was a very interesting guy. And like Tom said, this is a book a lot about people because car people are fascinating.
Well, see, my father actually helped the Hummer team too. He was just, he ended up selling at dealerships, and he went into the consulting business later on in life. And he'd worked for Buick for years and years and years before he became an AMC dealer. And so he had all kinds of background. And so he helped Hummer take the vehicles that were selling to the government and create a line that they could sell to the American public.
Ah, the H1.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
That's interesting.
And so he went, and I'll never forget, he went up to the test plane. He told me what he was involved in. And he was like, son, you're just not going to believe this car, man. He said, you know, because we being Jeep dealers, we understood all this stuff, that, man, they got tires that, like, inflate themselves as they get he was talking about the articulation and the suspension, and he was blown away at what they had done with four-wheel drive since he was last familiar with it, you know. And he had the best time, and I actually have in my closet some of the Hummer shirts that he got when they came out with the H1 and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
That's interesting. That's very interesting. I worked with a Marine who had intimate knowledge of what a Hummer could do under wartime conditions, and they are incredible.
Oh, yeah. They absolutely – it was genius. And I also found it absolutely fascinating that they used, you know, those diesel engines.
Yes.
Because, you know, that was something –
Yeah, they were smart. The management of the company, when General Motors was discontinuing that V8 diesel that they had,
right,
they said, well, we'll buy the tooling. And since then, they've been able to make it reliable, and they've like tripled the horsepower that comes out of it. And they build it themselves, so they save a lot of money on drivetrains.
Right, and so armed forces, have been using these vehicles, and again, coming out of Wisconsin all these years, right? So
yeah.
And so what? So my dad always used to make fun. I don't know, but he said, all those guys know how to make up theirs refrigerators. And so
I know there were jokes that Kelvinator refrigerators were going to come with four-wheel brakes and stuff like that. Yeah. I heard them all. When you're on the front line as a Rambler or AMC salesman, you hear all that stuff. But people would come in, they'd make their jokes, but then they'd buy them because they knew that we made good cars.
Yeah, well, see, my father worked for Buick. He was actually with Buick. He became the national used car manager for Buick. He was on the board of General Motors at one point, and the director of national fleet sales for Buick. And so he helped bring Opel into the country, actually. And so he had all those connections. Yeah, my dad would have been a great interview for you. Unfortunately, he went to be just about 2019. So, every time, he may have been just a dealer, but he was always telling them what they needed to do.
Of course.
Yeah.
Well, the dealers know more sometimes.
Yeah.
Years ago, I tracked down every former Nash and AMC executive I could find, and I recorded interviews with all of them at their houses or wherever. And I traveled all over the country to do this. And people said, what are you wasting your time with them for? I'll do that 10 years from now. Well, almost every single one of those people has passed away since then. But we've got all their memories stored on video discs. So
I am so grateful.
I
really am.
You did that, Pat.
Yeah, I mean, that's honoring to me. You're honoring, these guys spent their whole life in what, trying to design things that would make things better and cheaper, more reliable. All those things that the car business.
And they provided jobs.
Right.
I mean, they provided good-paying union jobs for people who ordinarily wouldn't have access to them. And it changed lives.
Well, unfortunately, we got to go. I hate we got to go because I've loved this show. So I'm so honored that you guys would do this with me again. Patrick Foster, Tom Glatch, with the book, the complete book of AMC cars. This thing is a treasure. They sent me one. I couldn't be more happy about it. You can go to my website, ChristianCarGuy.com. You can link right there and just order it. And again, just go back on Amazon or wherever you get it and give them a great rating because it is an amazing book. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great one, gentlemen.
Yes. And for all of you listening, remember what I always say,
This is the Truth Network.